In the shadow of the towering volcanoes Popocatépetl and its Taxihuatl, nestled in the rugged valleys of central Mexico, there once stood a confederation of fiercely independent city-states known as Tlaxcala. Unlike the mighty cities that bent their knees to the rising power of the Mexica, rulers of the Aztec Empire, the people of Tlaxcala never submitted. For over a century, they resisted, they fought, they bled. And though they were never fully conquered, their defiance came at a cost. This is the story of a war that never truly ended, a centuries-long struggle between two great powers of Mesoamerica, marked by shifting alliances, brutal warfare, political intrigue, and the ever. To understand the conflict between the Aztec Empire and Tlaxcala, we must first understand how the empire rose to power. In the early 14th century, the Mexica, a semi-nomadic group believed to have migrated from the mythical land of Aztlan, settled on an island in Lake Texcoco. There they founded Tenochtitlan, which would become the heart of what we now call the Aztec Empire. Under the leadership of figures like Itzcoatl, R. 1427 to 1440, and the brilliant general Moctezuma Ilhuicamina, R. 1440 to 1469, the Mexica forged the Triple Alliance with the city-states of Texcoco and Tlacopan, forming a powerful coalition that rapidly expanded its influence across Mesoamerica. Through a combination of military conquest, strategic marriages, and economic dominance, the Aztecs established a vast tributary empire that stretched from the Pacific coast to the Gulf of Mexico, from the highlands of Oaxaca to the Maya lowlands. But one region remains stubbornly outside their control: Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala was not a single city-state, but a confederation of four altepeme, city-states of Tepetepac, Ocotelulco, Chiahuitlan, and Tizatlan. Though often at odds with each other, these polities shared a common enemy: the Aztec Empire. Unlike the mighty cities that bent their knees to the rising power of the Mexica, rulers of the Aztec Empire, the people of Tlaxcala never submitted. For over a century they resisted, they fought, they bled, and though they were never fully conquered, their defiance came at a cost. This is the story of a war that never truly ended, a centuries-long struggle between two great powers of Mesoamerica, marked by shifting alliances, brutal warfare, political intrigue, and the ever-key figures, leaders of a defiant nation. Xicotencatl the Elder, the strategist. One of the most influential leaders of Tlaxcala was Xicotencatl the Elder, a seasoned noble and warlord who ruled the city of Tizatlan. A veteran of decades of conflict with the Aztecs, he was known for his tactical mind and deep understanding of both terrain and enemy strategy. Xicotencatl advocated for cautious resistance. He understood that direct confrontation with the full might of the Aztec Empire would be suicidal. Instead, he favored guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and the use of terrain to wear down invading forces. His leadership helped preserve Tlaxcala's autonomy during some of its darkest days. Xicotencatl the Younger, the warrior prince. Son of the elder Xicotencatl, Xicotencatl the Younger was a fierce and passionate warrior. Unlike his father, he was impatient with diplomacy and eager to strike back at the Aztecs with force. When the Spanish arrived in 1519, Xicotencatl the Younger saw an opportunity and threw his full support behind allying with Hernán Cortés against the hated Aztecs. However, his alliance with the Spaniards was controversial within Tlaxcala itself.
Some feared becoming pawns in another empire's game, and tensions flared between factions that supported the alliance and those that wished to maintain strict neutrality. Ultimately, his boldness would lead to both victory and tragedy. Moctezuma II, the emperor who saw the end coming. On the Aztec side, the figure most closely associated with the conflict was Moctezuma II, the ninth emperor of the Mexica. Far from the weak-willed ruler portrayed in later colonial accounts, Moctezuma was a skilled administrator and devout leader who expanded the empire's reach and strengthened its religious institutions. He viewed Tlaxcala as a thorn in the side of the empire, a persistent threat that could not be ignored. Under his rule, the Flower Wars intensified, and attempts to diplomatically isolate Tlaxcala increased. Yet, when the Spanish arrived, Moctezuma hesitated. Whether out of superstition, caution, or genuine uncertainty about the nature of the newcomers, his indecision allowed Cortés and his small army to gain allies, including the Tlaxcalans.
Turning points. Battles that shaped the conflict. The Flower Wars. Ritualized warfare. The Flower Wars were a defining feature of the Aztec-Tlaxcalan conflict. These ritual battles were not meant to conquer, but to capture enemies for sacrifice to the gods. For the Aztecs, these engagements served dual purposes, maintaining divine favor and training young warriors. For the Tlaxcalans, they were a source of unending suffering, a war without end. Despite being outnumbered and surrounded, the Tlaxcalans managed to hold their own in these encounters. In fact, they sometimes captured more prisoners than the Aztecs, a point of pride that bolstered their sense of identity and strength. The Siege of Teotihuacan, breaking the spirit. In 1486, the Aztec launched a major campaign against Tlaxcala, culminating in the Siege of Teotihuacan, a fortified town on the border between the two powers. The siege lasted for weeks, and when the Aztecs finally breached the walls, they razed the city and took thousands of captives. The event sent shockwaves through Tlaxcala, revealing the terrifying potential of total war. Though the Confederation survived, morale suffered. Many began to question whether continued resistance was worth the cost. The arrival of the Spaniards. A new player enters. In 1519, Hernán Cortés landed on the shores of Veracruz. Within months, he had made contact with various indigenous groups, seeking allies against the Aztecs. When he reached Tlaxcala, the response was mixed. Some leaders, especially Xocatli the Younger, saw the Spaniards as a godsend, a chance to finally break the Aztec stranglehold. Others feared that aligning with outsiders would bring new forms of oppression. After tense negotiations and several skirmishes, the Tlaxcalans agreed to ally with the Spaniards, on condition that they retain their independence and receive tribute after the war. The fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521 marked the end of the Aztec Empire and the beginning of a new era for Tlaxcala. At first, the Tlaxcalans were rewarded for their service. They were granted special privileges by the Spanish crown, including exemption from tribute and a degree of self-governance. However, these promises were not always honored. As Spanish colonization expanded, Tlaxcala found itself caught between competing interests. Its lands were gradually encroached upon by settlers, and its leaders were increasingly sidelined by colonial authorities. The Tlaxcalans had traded one master for another. Yet even under Spanish rule, Tlaxcala retained a strong sense of identity. Its people preserved aspects of their language, customs, and oral history, ensuring that their legacy endured.
Tlaxcalans were the only indigenous group given special status by the Spanish crown. Through the Capitulaciones de Tlaxcala, 1530, The Spanish crown officially recognized Tlaxcala's role in the conquest and granted them unique rights. Tlaxcalan warriors fought alongside the Spanish across the Americas. After the fall of Tenochtitlan, Tlaxcalan soldiers participated in expeditions to Guatemala, Honduras, and even as far as the Philippines. Tlaxcala had no standing army, just mobilized citizens. Unlike the professional warrior class of the Aztecs, Tlaxcala relied on citizen militias, making their resistance all the more impressive. Tlaxcalans practiced human sacrifice too. Though often portrayed as victims of Aztec ritualism, Tlaxcalans also engaged in sacrificial rites, particularly during wartime. The name Tlaxcala means place of bread, derived from the Nahue word tlaxcay, meaning coin tortilla. The name reflected the region's agricultural abundance and cultural identity. The Aztec-Tlaxcalan conflict raises profound questions about resistance, identity, and the ethics of survival. Was Tlaxcala justified in allying with the Spaniards, knowing the destruction it would unleash on the rest of Mesoamerica? Or was it simply a pragmatic move in a brutal world? Some modern scholars argue that the Tlaxcalans were collaborators in the conquest, while others see them as victims of circumstance, forced to choose between annihilation and adaptation. There is also the issue of historical memory. While the Aztecs are often romanticized as tragic heroes, the Tlaxcalans are frequently overlooked, despite having played a pivotal role in shaping the course of Mexican history. And then there is the question of what might have happened if the Aztecs had succeeded in conquering Tlaxcala. Would the empire have grown stronger? Could it have better resisted European invasion? We can never know for sure. As the conflict between the Aztec Empire and Tlaxcala unfolded over generations, it became more than just a series of skirmishes. It was a protracted war of attrition, fought not only with weapons, but with diplomacy, ideology, and sheer willpower. To understand how this war persisted for so long, we must look beyond battles and into the strategic frameworks that shaped both sides' survival.
Tlaxcala's rugged terrain played a crucial role in its ability to resist conquest. Surrounded by steep valleys and dense forests, the region offered natural defenses that made large-scale invasions difficult. The Aztecs, whose military strength relied heavily on massed formations and psychological warfare, found themselves at a disadvantage when attempting to penetrate Tlaxcalan territory. Unlike the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, which was built on an island and required specialized logistics for siege operations, Tlaxcala was a decentralized network of fortified hilltop settlements. These strongholds were strategically placed to control trade routes and choke points, making them ideal for guerrilla-style warfare. Tlaxcalan warriors were adept at ambush tactics, using their intimate knowledge of the land to strike quickly and disappear before the enemy could regroup. They also employed light infantry formations that allowed for rapid movement through rough terrain, a stark contrast to the Aztec elite units like the Eagle and Jaguar warriors, who often fought in rigid phalanxes designed for open-field battles. While the Aztecs had access to superior metallurgy, particularly in crafting obsidian-bladed macuitls, wooden swords embedded with sharp obsidian shards, the Tlaxcalans matched them in martial prowess. Their soldiers were trained from youth, often engaging in mock battles and ritual combat to hone their skills. But where the Aztecs excelled in organized warfare, the Tlaxcalans thrived in asymmetric resistance. This difference would define the nature of the conflict for over a century. While much of the historical focus is on battles and bloodshed, diplomacy played an equally important role in the Aztec-Tlaxcalan conflict. Both sides engaged in alliance building, espionage, and political maneuvering to gain the upper hand.
The Aztecs, masters of tributary expansion, sought to isolate Tlaxcala by forging alliances with neighboring city-states such as Cholula and Huexotzinco. These alliances were not always voluntary. Many smaller polities submitted out of fear rather than loyalty. Nevertheless, they provided the Aztecs with logistical support, intelligence, and additional troops during campaigns against Tlaxcala. Tlaxcala, aware of its encirclement, responded with diplomatic agility. It cultivated relationships with other independent states and even attempted to reach out to distant powers like the Tarascans of Michoacán, who were traditional enemies of the Aztecs. While these efforts did not result in formal alliances, they contributed to a broader anti-Aztec sentiment across Mesoamerica. One of the most significant diplomatic moves came in the form of cultural resistance. Tlaxcala maintained its own religious traditions, rejecting the dominance of Aztec deities like Huitzilopochtli. This ideological independence reinforced a sense of unity among the Tlaxcalans and helped solidify their identity as a people distinct from the empire that sought to absorb them. At the heart of the Aztec-Tlaxcalan conflict lay the Flower Wars, ritualized battles designed primarily for capturing prisoners for sacrifice. While often dismissed as mere religious exercises, these engagements served multiple strategic purposes. For the Aztecs, flower wars were a means of maintaining divine favor, training young warriors, and exerting pressure on Tlaxcala without committing to full-scale invasion. By periodically raiding Tlaxcalan territory, the Aztecs kept the Confederation in a state of perpetual alert, draining resources and morale. For the Tlaxcalans, these encounters were a double-edged sword. On one hand, they suffered heavy losses and endured the humiliation of being used as sacrificial victims. On the other hand, the Flower Wars gave Tlaxcala a chance to prove its military superiority. In several instances, Tlaxcalan forces captured more prisoners than the Aztecs, a fact that bolstered their prestige and reinforced their belief in divine protection. Some scholars argue that the Flower Wars created a cycle of dependence. The Aztecs needed Tlaxcalan captives for their rituals, while Tlaxcala gained legitimacy and cohesion through resistance. In this way, the conflict was paradoxically sustained by its very violence. Living under constant threat of invasion shaped every aspect of Tlaxcalan society. From governance to agriculture, the people of Tlaxcala adapted to a world where survival meant vigilance. Food production was prioritized above all else. Unlike the Chinampas, floating gardens of the Valley of Mexico, Tlaxcalan farmers relied on terraced farming techniques and dryland cultivation techniques to maximize yield in a challenging environment. Grain storage facilities were built into caves and underground bunkers to protect against raids. Children were raised with stories of heroism and sacrifice. Oral histories passed down through generations emphasized themes of resistance, endurance, and divine favor. Religious festivals celebrated warrior saints and ancestral leaders, reinforcing a shared identity that transcended individual city-states within the Confederation. Even architecture reflected the militarization of daily life. Homes were built close together for defensive purposes, and watchtowers dotted the landscape. Walls were reinforced with stone and timber, and escape tunnels connected key settlements, a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of a people who lived under siege for centuries. By the early 16th century, the Aztec Empire had reached the height of its power, but cracks were beginning to show. Internal dissent, rising tribute demands, and growing resentment among subject peoples created fertile ground for rebellion. When Hernán Cortés arrived in 1519, he found a Mesoamerican world already on the brink of collapse. The Tlaxcalans, after decades of resisting the Aztec domination, saw an opportunity to finally break free. Their initial encounters with the Spaniards were tense. Cortés and his men were attacked upon entering Tlaxcalan territory, but after a series of skirmishes and negotiations, the two sides formed an uneasy alliance. Xochicatl the Younger, eager to strike back at the Aztecs, advocated for full cooperation, while older leaders like Mexicatzin urged caution. Ultimately, the decision was made to ally with the Spaniards, not out of blind trust, because the alternative seemed worse. If the Aztecs prevailed, Tlaxcala would be erased. If the Spaniards won, perhaps they could negotiate better terms. And so, history turned on that choice. With Tlaxcalan warriors leading the charge, Cortés marched toward Tenochtitlan. The rest, as they say, is history. But the consequences of that alliance would haunt Tlaxcala for generations. With the fall of Tenochtitlan in 1521, the long-standing conflict between the Aztec Empire and Tlaxcala officially came to an end. But for the Tlaxcalans, this was not a moment of triumph. It was the beginning of a new struggle, one that would shape their identity under Spanish colonial rule. Though they had fought alongside Hernán Cortés and played a crucial role in the conquest, the Tlaxcalans soon realized that victory did not guarantee freedom.
In the aftermath of the conquest, the Tlaxcalans were granted certain privileges by the Spanish crown. In 1530, King Charles I of Spain issued the Capitulaciones de Tlaxcala, a formal agreement recognizing Tlaxcala's contributions and offering special status to its people. Under this treaty, Tlaxcala was exempt from tribute payments to the Spanish crown. Its leaders retained limited self-governance through local councils. The Confederation was given land rights and protection from encomiendas, forced labor systems. Tlaxcalan warriors who served with the Spaniards were promised rewards. However, these promises were not always honored. As Spanish colonization expanded, settlers began encroaching on Tlaxcalan lands. The exemption from tribute was gradually eroded, and many Tlaxcalans found themselves pressed into labor systems not so different from those imposed on other indigenous groups. The very alliance that had saved them from Aztec domination now bound them to a new empire, one that sought control over all of New Spain. Despite the mixed outcomes of the Spanish alliance, Tlaxcalan warriors remained active participants in the broader conquest of Mesoamerica. Their military skills, loyalty, and deep knowledge of indigenous warfare made them valuable assets to the Spanish. Tlaxcalans joined expeditions to Guatemala, fighting against the Quiche and Cachiquel Maya, Yucatan, assisting in the final subjugation of the Maya states, Michoacán and Jalisco, participating in campaigns against the Purepecha and Caxcan peoples. Even as far as the Philippines, where some Tlaxcalan soldiers traveled with Spanish forces during early explorations. These ventures brought some Tlaxcalans wealth and prestige, but also exposed them to the brutal realities of imperial expansion. Many began to question whether they had traded one form of oppression for another.
One of the most remarkable aspects of Tlaxcalan history is how much of its culture, language, and traditions endured despite centuries of colonial rule. Unlike many indigenous groups that were forcibly converted or assimilated, the Tlaxcalans negotiated their conversion to Christianity. They built churches on top of old ceremonial sites rather than abandoning them entirely. Some native religious practices continued in secret, blending with Catholic traditions in ways that still exist today. Their language, Nahuatl, remained widely spoken, and oral histories preserve the memory of their resistance against the Aztecs. These stories were passed down through generations, reinforcing a strong sense of cultural pride and historical continuity. Even under Spanish governance, Tlaxcalan leaders maintained a degree of autonomy. Local councils continued to function,
and traditional roles within the community persisted. This resilience ensured that Tlaxcala never truly disappeared, even as it became part of a larger colonial world. By the late 16th century, Tlaxcala had been fully integrated into the viceroyalty of New Spain, but its legacy as the land that never fell endured. Its people were remembered not just as allies of the Spaniards, but as defiant warriors who had resisted the mightiest empire of their time. In many ways, their story became a symbol of indigenous resilience, proof that even the smallest polity could stand up to overwhelming odds. Today, Tlaxcala remains a state within modern Mexico, proud of its unique heritage. Monuments honor figures like Xicotencatl the Elder and Younger. Museums display artifacts from the pre-Columbian era, and festivals celebrate the region's independence. But perhaps the greatest testament to Tlaxcala's enduring spirit is this. It was the only major indigenous state in central Mexico that was never conquered by the Aztecs. And though the war ended 500 years ago, its echoes still resonate. As the centuries passed, much of Tlaxcala's history was overshadowed by the grand narratives of the Aztec Empire and the Spanish conquest. Yet in recent decades, archaeologists, historians, and indigenous communities have worked to reclaim the story of Tlaxcala, uncovering new evidence, challenging colonial-era biases, and shedding light on a people who never bowed.
For many years, Tlaxcala was portrayed in historical accounts as a junior partner in the Spanish conquest, often depicted as opportunistic collaborators rather than proud defenders of their homeland. But modern scholarship has begun to shift this perspective. Historians now emphasize that Tlaxcala's alliance with the Spaniards was not an act of betrayal, but a strategic survival move made under immense pressure. The Confederation had spent over a century resisting Aztec domination. It was already at war when Cortés arrived. Their decision to ally with the Europeans was not about conquest, but about preserving autonomy. This reinterpretation has been supported by indigenous oral histories, which continue to be passed down through generations. Elders in Tlaxcalan communities still recount tales of heroic resistance, of warriors who fought not just for land, but for identity. Recent archaeological excavations in and around Tizatlan, Ocotelulco, and Quiahuistlan have uncovered stunning insights into daily life, military practices, and religious traditions in pre-Columbian Tlaxcala. Some key discoveries include excavations near the borderlands between Tlaxcala and Aztec-controlled territory have revealed hidden fortifications, including watchtowers, earthen ramparts, and underground tunnels. These structures suggest that Tlaxcala was not merely a loosely connected confederation, but a highly organized military state capable of sustained resistance. Grave sites containing warriors buried with macahuitl, obsidian-tipped spears, and ceremonial shields have provided direct evidence of Tlaxcalan martial culture. Some remains show signs of healed battle wounds, indicating that these warriors fought multiple campaigns, reinforcing the idea of long-term warfare. In the ruins of the Ocotelulco Palace, archaeologists discovered well-preserved murals depicting scenes of daily life, rituals, and battles. One particularly famous mural shows Tlaxcalan warriors fighting off Aztec invaders, reinforcing the region's narrative of defiance. These murals are especially significant because they offer a Tlaxcalan perspective on their own history, something rarely found in surviving Mesoamerican records. Despite its portrayal as a victim of Aztec ritualism, Tlaxcala also practiced human sacrifice, particularly during times of war. Excavations at ceremonial sites have uncovered altars stained with blood residue, as well as sacrificial victims with signs of ritual killing. This discovery challenges the simplistic view of Tlaxcala as morally superior to the Aztecs.
Instead, it reinforces the understanding that violence and ritual were deeply embedded in all Mesoamerican cultures, shaped by shared beliefs about cosmology, warfare, and divine favor. Artifacts found in Tlaxcalan settlements, including jade from Guatemala, turquoise from the American Southwest, and shells from the Gulf Coast, reveal that Tlaxcala was part of a far-reaching trade network. This economic independence helped sustain the Confederation even when surrounded by hostile forces. Modern genetic research has also contributed to our understanding of Tlaxcalan identity. DNA analysis of ancient remains has shown that the people of Tlaxcala were ethnically distinct from both the Mexica and other neighboring groups. Some lineages trace back to early Mesoamerican civilizations, while others suggest migration patterns from northern regions. Interestingly, some modern Tlaxcalans still carry genetic markers matching those of pre-Columbian warriors, linking them directly to the very people who resisted the Aztec Empire. This genetic continuity has become a source of pride for many in the region, reinforcing the idea that the spirit of Tlaxcala lives on in its descendants. The story of Tlaxcala's resistance against the Aztec Empire is more than just a tale of war. It is a testament to resilience, identity, and survival in the face of overwhelming odds. For over a century, the people of Tlaxcala stood firm while empires rose and fell around them. They were never conquered by the Mexica, even as nearly every other independent polity in central Mexico succumbed to Aztec domination. Their ability to maintain autonomy was not due to luck or geography alone. It was the result of strategic warfare, political unity, cultural pride, and an unyielding belief in their right to self-determination. Yet, like all great struggles, their victory came with costs. Their alliance with the Spaniards, though born out of necessity, led to new forms of subjugation. Their traditions were reshaped, their lands gradually absorbed into colonial systems, and their leaders often sidelined in favor of European administrators. But unlike many indigenous groups that disappeared under Spanish rule, Tlaxcala endured. And so, what can we learn from this long, bitter conflict? History often remembers winners, but the legacy of Tlaxcala reminds us that resistance itself can be a form of triumph. The Tlaxcalans did not defeat the Aztec in open battle. They did not conquer Tenochtitlan, but they preserved their identity, their language, and their way of life for generations. In today's world, where communities face oppression, displacement, and erasure, the story of Tlaxcala serves as a powerful reminder: survival is resistance. The Tlaxcalan-Spanish alliance changed the course of history, but it also demonstrated the fragility of wartime partnerships. Allies today may become adversaries tomorrow. Promises made in times of crisis are not always honored once peace is restored. This lesson remains relevant in modern geopolitics, where nations and communities must navigate shifting alliances and uncertain futures. Though the Aztec Empire collapsed within a generation, Tlaxcalan culture persisted. Its language, oral histories, and traditions continued long after the fall of Tenochtitlan. Even under colonial rule, the people of Tlaxcala found ways to preserve their heritage, adapting without being erased. It is a reminder that culture is one of humanity's most enduring weapons, stronger than armies, more lasting than monuments. For centuries, the story of Tlaxcala was told through the lens of Spanish chroniclers, who saw the Tlaxcalans as useful allies at best, opportunistic collaborators at worst. But oral histories, archaeological discoveries, and modern scholarship have helped restore a more nuanced view. This teaches us that history is not static. It evolves as new voices are heard and new evidence uncovered. And sometimes, the most important stories are those that were nearly forgotten. Though the last battle between the Aztecs and Tlaxcalans was fought nearly 500 years ago, its echoes still shape the present. Modern Tlaxcalans take pride in their ancestors' defiance. Their state flag bears the image of Xicontecutl the Younger. Museums display ancient weapons and murals. Festivals celebrate the old gods and warriors. And in the quiet hills where battles once raged, the wind still whispers the names of those who fought for freedom. So, yes, the war that never ended still lives on.